Good evening. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for being here. My name is Rod Cookrow, and I'm the chairman this year of Agenda Alexandria. I want to welcome you here, both people who are here live in the auditorium at the George Washington Masonic Memorial Auditorium, and then also people joining us online. Before I begin, I want to thank our presenting sponsors who are very generous in their support of the organization that helps us to rent these spaces, McInerney Associates, Simpson Development, and the Zebra. On a sad note, I want to inform people if they don't know about it, and also pay homage to a very prominent member of our community who died this morning. How many of you here have been to the Birchmere? All right. Well, Gary Olsey was the founder of the Birchmere 35 years ago when it was in Arlington. He's in his latest location in Alexandria now for more than a quarter century, and he passed away this morning suddenly at the age of 80. He brought a lot of recognition to Alexandria as a music venue, not just in the region, but nationally, where we had all sorts of famous artists coming here. Graham Nash is going to be here in April, but he will be missed. The business is going to continue, but he was the guy who made it happen. And if you have a chance, look in the newspaper, read his obituary, and listen to a piece of music he might have liked. He has a really good book that came out last year. That's the history of the Birchmere and all the artists who played there. It's available online. It's available in their bookstore. I just finished reading it, and it's remarkable to see the array of people who've been there over the years, from bluegrass artists to Wayne Newton. It's like everybody in the world who wanted to play in Virginia played there. So rest in peace, Gary Olsey. So tonight's program is kind of wonkish in a way, but one of our board members, Michael Lee Pope, who some of you may know, he's a prominent local reporter. He's in Richmond right now covering the legislature. So he's not here tonight, but he had an idea to sort of do a reboot of a program we did 10 years ago on census data. And what does the census data tell us about Alexandria and the region, and where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going? So we're lucky to have two very, very qualified panelists. To my immediate right is Jill Caniff, is that right? Did I say that right? Caniff, who's with the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, which is an association of all the local governments of Northern Virginia. And she has a title, which I'll let her explain when she introduces herself, because it's a long one. And then in terms of thinking about our schools, we wanted to have someone here from the school system. And Erica Gulig, who's on the right of Jill, she's in charge of looking at demographics and facilities and sort of what the schools need as they grow and as the population of the city expands or contracts. And so we're going to do something we don't normally do because this is about data and about the census. We're going to do some slides. So please don't be bored. Please pay attention. We'll let each person sort of present their slides. Then we'll go to questions. As we normally do, I will ask some questions that I prepared, and then, of course, you're more than free. In fact, you're invited to submit your own questions to us, both in person and online streaming. So without further ado, Jill, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you're here tonight. What do you want us to walk away with?
Well, thank you for inviting me. I am with the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, and my role is the Senior Regional Demographer and Analyst for the organization. I manage the demographics program, and Northern Virginia Regional Commission, as Rod said, is a consortium of local jurisdictions in the region, including Alexandria, where all these 13 jurisdictions that belong to the commission get together to discuss regional level issues and do regional solutions and planning for anything that just crosses the boundaries that needs a bigger picture look. So I will be talking to you about Northern Virginia as a whole and where we are as a region with our economy, particularly as a result of the pandemic and the impacts it had. And then I will talk to you about the demographic shifts that the pandemic has caused and where we were headed as a region. And I've been a demographer now for over 20 years. And I've been in county governments for close to 20 years as well. So I've been throughout the region, Loudoun County, Prince William, Fairfax County, and now Northern Virginia Regional Commission. So that's my background.
Super. So, I mean, as you go through your presentation, because I'm sure people in Alexandria are going to want to know as much as they can about how this data then pertains to our localities, sort of standing within that data set.
Yes, and that is what Northern Virginia Regional Commission does, is we look at the big picture of the region, but then we also look at each jurisdiction, such as Alexandria, and where it fits into the region. So you will see that with the data that I share tonight.
Okay. Go ahead. You can start your presentation.
Okay.
Can everybody see these clearly? Good. All right.
Next slide, please. So the first thing I'll say is that with the state of the region, there was a report published that I authored back in July on the economic recovery from the pandemic and our transformation as a region. And what that study showed is the severe labor shortage that we are facing right now in the entire region, including Alexandria. And we studied the reason why we had this labor shortage, as well as how has the recovery been going, so that the businesses that need to fill these jobs can recover and get the workers they need. So that's what you'll see on these next slides. Next slide, please. So what you're seeing here is the labor force in Northern Virginia, and at the peak of the labor force before the pandemic, we were doing really well. We'd been climbing as a region and trending upward for a very long time, but then this pandemic set us back about 3 years of the growth that we had been achieving. And so now, those numbers at the very bottom are the years. So this is annual data. From 2008 all the way to 2022. And this is monthly, actually, but the information at the bottom are the years. And as of, let's see, November 22, the labor force was still down in the region by 54,000 since the pandemic began. So that's a reduction of about 6%. So we still are definitely below where we'd like to be. And we have about at least 2.5 years to recover if we were to continue at the same pace of growth that we've been experiencing the past several months. But because of the oncoming recession, it likely will be well longer than the 2.5 years to get back to where we were. So it's definitely a struggle. And there are a lot of jobs out there posted, but the businesses just can't fulfill all the positions that they are advertising. So this shortage is certainly something we want to strive to overcome and find solutions to.
What are the consequences of the business being unable to fill those positions? I mean, how persistent is this vacancy rate, not vacancy rate, but the lack of workers going to sustain itself?
Well, it certainly means that the wages, that they've had to increase their wages, which can be good for the workers, but not good for the businesses. And so they have to reduce their economic output as a result of increasing their wages. But it also means like they have the competition, so they have to really look at the needs of the workforce these days, what people are wanting, such as working from home, as well as like the hybrid working and remote work, and the needs such as that if they really try to fulfill those needs that people want, they'll have more success in getting the workers that they want when they are competing with many other businesses. So that's very important for the businesses to consider that if they want to succeed in today's environment. So what I'm showing you now, I believe, next slide, is the employment by industry. And what this is showing you, which our report is online that this came from, but the main point from this is to show which industries are still struggling since the pandemic. And the main ones are, one of them is accommodation. That has had the slowest growth and has not reached the pre-pandemic levels in the entire region. The other industries that have not reached pre-pandemic levels include the education sector and the other services sector. Other services includes things like your auto repair shops, your nail salons, and those types of services. So those three are usually low-income serving industries, and low-income industries, low-income wages that is, were certainly the hardest hit and still the ones struggling to fill their jobs. So that goes back to the need to increase the wages, or people will try and move on to things that are more stable and higher wage professions, which is what we've really seen in this region. Yes, so the time frame, I'm sorry, since it's hard to see, was at the far left, at your far left was February of 2020, and then today's numbers are available, I believe it is, as of October or November is what you're seeing up there. So beginning of the pandemic versus now, how we've recovered.
Or not.
Or not, yes. Many have recovered. So next slide. And this one, let's see, it shows you none of those sectors that are still recovering. As you see from all these, you've got some big climbs since February and others that have been just stabilized and steady. Next. All the sectors, let's see, on this one, we've got, I'm trying to see which slide we're on.
At the top is food services, then you have
Yes.
healthcare,
Healthcare.
information. On the bottom, manufacturing, other services, which as Jill mentioned, were things like service sector jobs. And then professional and business services, so I'm guessing might be like law firms and CPAs and.
Professional services, yes, that's correct. The next slide is your retail trade, transportation, warehousing, your wholesale trade, your federal government, local government, and the state government.
I want to stop you right here, because the federal government clearly took a huge dive. There's a chasm in, it looks like sometime in early 2022 on federal government employment, which you may want to explain, but local government, which pertains to us, that's climbed a lot since the pandemic. Why is that? Why has local government employment risen so quickly?
Well, local government actually, it was one of those industries that took some time to recover for sure, and is now back to the pre-pandemic levels, but it was actually a slower one to recover. And that would have been because of all the layoffs that happened for those sectors, such as schools, that certainly had the cutbacks during that time, but I'm not exactly sure all the details of that.
Well, I'm just going to pause it. You may not know the answer to it, but in Alexandria during the pandemic, the city prided itself on the fact that no one got laid off. Everybody kept getting paid, even if their job was no longer as engaged with the public because of the pandemic. So I'd be curious to know, maybe at a later date, why local government employment plummeted in some jurisdictions, not here, and then is now rising at a pretty rapid rate. Is that the way I read that graph?
Yes, and as I think about it, one of the reasons very well may be just the fact that there was the labor shortage and just people leaving their jobs because they didn't want to be here any longer for various reasons, or that they just had to stop being in the labor force so they could take care of their children. Okay. And some were just, people that left the labor force also were just leaving because they wanted to take care of their personal health, and there were the fears of the pandemic at the time.
Okay.
So those very well could be associated with it. Moving on, next slide is the demographics that affected this labor shortage that we're now experiencing includes the age of our labor force in the region, as well as the impact of the women and men that are in our labor force and how that's distributed by industry. And then our population declined during the pandemic, and that affected our labor force, And then the immigrants are a very vital part of our economy here in the region and have fostered much of the growth over the past few decades for our region. And they also impacted the labor shortage by slowing their growth. And that growth, again, impacted the labor shortage. So we'll get into each of these here in the next slides. So first is the gender, which next slide, please. The low-wage industries have a high concentration of women and men, and the low-wage industries were the hardest hit in Northern Virginia, which caused women to be disproportionately impacted. So what you're seeing here is the pre-pandemic on the top is showing that the female workforce was 48.3% of all workers, whereas during the pandemic, that female workforce dropped to 47.3% of Northern Virginia's share. And then as of quarter 3 of 2021, which when the report was done, that was the most current data, but even today, the share of females, even with the more current data, is still less than it was pre-pandemic times. So that's an indicator of the potential child care issues that are ongoing in the region that need to be resolved if we're to get the woman back into the workforce. So something to be well aware of that's going on. And then this next slide is another way of indicating the employment loss by the gender. And it shows that the 48.3% is where we was our baseline pre-pandemic as part of our share of our workforce, yet of all the jobs lost, there was a significantly higher share of the women in the workforce that lost their jobs. And as of 2021, quarter 3, when most people were back at their jobs that wanted to be back, those who were not back, a significant share was the woman. And that was a share of 67% as of the end of 2021. When, again, people were largely back in the workforce that wanted to be. So those who couldn't be were mainly, I think, the child care. Women that were having to do child care is a large factor. And then next slide is the 2010 versus the 2020 information on the age of distribution of our region. And what this is showing is how for the young folks, the under age 5 kids, the share of their population in our region has been dropping, and that's been a drop because of the birth rates dropping. And that therefore impacts the schools and the forecasts for the schools, which we will get into, I'm sure, in the other presentations. And then you also see that the age 25 to 44 is the young adults, and that has really been the highest share of our population for a long time. It did drop, though, some between 2010 and 2020, but it's still very high. And that group has always been high and remains high because immigrants are really the drivers of that group and our growing population. And the immigrants that move here tend to be the young adults with children, or certainly young adults that come and have children once they are here. And what you're also seeing from this is the aging of the baby boomers in the last 3 graphs, where the 45 to 54 drops, but the later age groups are rising. So we got many phenomenons going on here in the past 10 years. And then next slide. This next slide shows you the same information, but I've inserted into here what the conditions were during the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic in 2019 are the orange bars. So the only age group that dropped in our region from the pandemic, from the orange to the green, was your young adults, as well as your children. So what this indicates is that the young adults are the ones that left our region, and that is because of the ability to now work remotely. And then the children, the birth rates, also just births in general, really declined greatly, and during the pandemic, to the point that before the pandemic, for every 6 births that there were in the state of Virginia, the pandemic only saw 1 birth. So our births really dropped greatly. And so when it comes to the labor force issue, the fact that the young adults left our labor force and moved out of the region, that's certainly one of the big factors why we have a labor shortage. And one of the main reasons that we all have to be aware of why they left is, I think, the affordability issue. If they can have a better quality of life outside of our region, they're going to want to live elsewhere. So to attract them and find solutions for ways to attract this age group to our region is really something we all have to come together on and find solutions to, because they are critical to the success of our businesses going forward. And next slide is the population change annually in Northern Virginia. We have grown as a region every year ever since the Census Bureau started tracking this information on an annual basis since 1970. But during the pandemic, from 1920 to 21, what this is showing is the first decline our region has ever seen overall since data began being collected in 1970. So this was really dramatic. And this is something that was due to, again, the people leaving the region, specifically the young adults leaving, that this is indicating that they left, and it really impacted our region's growth, as well as the birth rates and the deaths from the pandemic all together caused this. So this is really a temporary phenomenon that there's been a lot of misinformation out there, I believe, on this. A lot of people thinking this is a new thing that's going to happen going forward, which really is not the case. This was really just very temporary for the 2 years of the pandemic. And Alexandria's population declined, which is the next page. Next slide, please. So of the 12,000 people that we lost in our region from the population decline, about 4,000 of it was Alexandria, losing population. And several other jurisdictions lost the population as well. Next slide. And then what this is showing you the components of the population change, and the dark blue at the very bottom is your domestic migration. So for quite a while now, since at least 2011 to 2021, we've had a migration out of the region. Rather than getting people that live in the U.S. coming here, we have more people leaving than coming. So our main drivers in our region for our population growth, as this indicates, is not people moving in, but instead it's the international migrants being critical to our economy and our region, as well as just natural increase. And both of those, the natural increase in the immigrants coming to our region really declined during the pandemic. And so since that growth was much slower than usual, the domestic outmigration really dwarfed our numbers and caused us to then have the decline in the population you saw. So going forward, you may see in the next numbers that come out in 2022, you may continue to see a decline for the region. And I wouldn't be surprised if that does happen, knowing that the births were really low from the 2021 to 2022 period for the state of Virginia, for data that was just released by the Census Bureau. So again, those low birth rates definitely dwarf the numbers that the outmigration may be offsetting. So the outmigration may be greater still than the births and the international migration. Now, international migration has recovered pretty much to the pre-pandemic levels, which is great news, at least for the nation and Virginia. And knowing that at least half of the immigrants, usually about 60% of the immigrants that come to Virginia come to Northern Virginia. So the fact that Virginia's recovered certainly signals that we will have recovered in that regard. Next. So lastly is the population forecast. And the fact that this decline is only temporary due to the pandemic, the city of Alexandria, as well as all of our other regions, jurisdictions, really foresee a forecasted growth continuing very heavily over the next 20 years. This graph shows you 1990s growth all the way to 2040. And the growth had been really fast in our region through 2010, but it had slowed in 2020, and it will continue to slow. And the main driver, again, will be our natural increase as well as the immigrants that I keep mentioning. If we want our economy to grow, we're going to need certainly to have the immigrants coming to our region to fill all skill levels. They are critical to all skill levels, as well as jobs for the lower income. They're critical to filling those jobs that a lot of people don't wish to have, but they're also critical to our tech sector and professional sectors. And the other thing I'd like to emphasize on why things are slowing also has to do with the land use. These numbers that you're seeing are conservative in that they are produced by all the jurisdictions in the region, and they are based on your land use and zoning. And so for Alexandria, of all the growth that's supposed to happen through 2040 in the region, 10% of the growth in our region is expected or forecasted to be Alexandria. And that growth in the next 20 years, Alexandria City, the government forecast about 48,000 people to be added to this city. And from 2000, for the same period from 2000 to 2020, there was a growth of 31,000. So these next 20 years are going to be well faster than the past 20 years, is what the city is forecasting. So that's where it comes in, where zoning and land use is very critical to constraining growth. And so all these rezonings that have been occurring, specifically over by like Potomac Yards and along the waterfront, are what I think is really adding to this, as well as along Eisenhower Ave, as well as Landmark. They're supposed to get a lot of redevelopment. So all of those areas are what's contributing to this. So when you see a rezoning, it's very important to give your opinion on it, because it will impact you as a citizen, whether or not you want the growth. So it's good to really stay involved in that aspect of your community. So that's where I'll leave it, and then we'll go into questions, but also...
Well, Jill, thank you so much. I'm going to start with one question before we get to Erica, because you showed some data that showed repeatedly that younger people sort of in the prime of life, 25 to 44, are leaving the area, and your presumption was because they could live somewhere else, do the same job remotely, have a better quality of life, right?
That's correct.
And they're going to be replaced by people who are migrants from other parts of the world who may or may not bring the same skill level to replace them in the same job situation. So I'm wondering, how are the local governments calculating the impact of national landing and the Amazon effect? In other words, Amazon is looking to hire lots of people, reportedly. I mean, tens of thousands. Are those people going to be here for those jobs?
That's what we certainly want to hope, that they will be here, but there's a lot of competition from the rest of the U.S., so our economic situation right now, it makes it very, very tough to find those workers to fill those jobs. So those workers that are filling them certainly have had the affordability issue at stake. And there's been a lot of just people coming and having to double up and do roommate situations or live with their parents. So those people that really want to live here are finding means of living through those sorts of situations. So there are ways for them to be here. for sure, but more affordable housing certainly should be on the horizon.
Okay, well, thank you for a great presentation. Please submit questions for Jill, but I want to move on to Erica Gulick, who is the Executive Director of Facilities for the Alexandria City Public Schools. I'm really glad you're here, because we wanted to have someone from the city's administration here. The city's planning and zoning office declined our invitation to send one of their staffers here. They have a demographer, but that person was too busy tonight apparently to be here. So you're going to be giving us sort of a city flavor of first of all, describe exactly what you do. I mean, how do you look at the demographic data that you get from the Northern Virginia Regional Commission and the city itself and other sources to sort of plan what the schools are doing? Because after all, people need to understand that the schools are the lion's share of our city's budget. So spending on the schools is often decided based upon projections people make about student population growth at the kindergarten, grade school, middle school, and high school level. So if you want to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and I know you brought a couple of slides you want to talk about.
Sure. Well, good evening. Thank you for having me. As Rod said, I'm Erica Gulick. I'm Executive Director of Facilities. I've been with ACPS for 7.5 years. I recognize a lot of you, and if you've stayed in tune to ACPS's capital projects and construction, you've probably had to listen to me at another meeting. So I'm very happy to be with you here tonight. As Executive Director of Facilities, we run all things facilities, but one component of our job, and where I started with ACPS, was as the planner and doing projections on behalf of the school division for us to be able to plan for the operating budget as well as the capital budget and our needs. We do partner very close with the City of Alexandria and the Department of Planning and Zoning. I will say, in their defense, their demographer is brand new, and so maybe they didn't want to throw that person into this situation. So we work very closely. There's a couple different points of data that we use to do our projections. We have historically, except for the 2 years of the pandemic, been very accurate since we started our new projection process in 2014. And that, we could talk a little bit about what that accuracy means as well. I brought a couple of slides tonight just to speak to where ACPS is right now, just to speak to the numbers and the actual data. Before I get into that, just on the projection process, ACPS uses its own enrollment data to project what enrollment will be the following year. And we do that by looking at historical trends in retention of students year over year, what we call a cohort survival rate. So if you are a kindergartner at Douglas MacArthur, how likely are you to be a first grader next year? And that's how we do our projection methodology. We do it annually for 10 years, and our capital program budget is 10 years as well, so it follows along with that to provide adequate capacity. And then for kindergarten, because we don't necessarily have all those students in the year prior, we use birth data, as Jill referenced, from the Virginia Department of Health, of all births to mothers with addresses in the city of Alexandria.
Erica, how do you extrapolate then from the birth data what the likelihood is that a born child 5 years out will enroll in ACPS as opposed to going to a Montessori school or a private school?
Right, so we look at, again, historical projections. Historically, ACPS is what we call a K capture rate. So we look at how many students are born prior to October 1st of any 1 year. 5 years later, what's the chances of them becoming a kindergarten student? I have a slide on kindergarten specifically, but so we take the sum of the amount of births that are born, and then we typically expect around a percentage somewhere between 53 to 60%. And now it's not those exact kids. In fact, it most likely isn't those exact babies that were born, but in total, in number, it gives us a good way to project how many kindergarten students we'll have. So lately, it's been about 55% of the total births. So the data I have with me today, is this my?
This is the capture rate slide.
Yeah, so this is the kindergarten capture rate. And so what this is showing you, and I would ask you to pay attention to mostly what's left of the black line, but what we're showing you in the red is the total births born in the city of Alexandria over time. And in the blue is our kindergarten enrollment or our kindergarten projection if it's after what the black line is. So you could see, and as Jill referenced, we had climbing birth data really up in through 2016 was our highest year of birth data with it was 2016, 2017. There were 2,800 births in the city of Alexandria. So to us, that would have led to a lot more kindergartners in September of 2021. That didn't happen. And because of the pandemic, we didn't get as many of those kindergartners as we thought we would get. Our K capture rate ended up somewhere in the 40 or low 50 percentile. And then when we extrapolate that out over the years, because that's what all of our projections are based on after that kindergarten enrollment, is that cohort and how they travel along in their journey with us at ACPS. That impacts our out-year projection.
I have a question on this. Now, I may be the only person here who's not really math literate, but I hope others here in the audience will see this. You're showing that the birth rate's going to go down over time,
Yes.
but the kindergarten enrollment's going to go up.
Yes.
So does that mean you'll be capturing more than 55%, and why would that be?
So we show the 55%. What I will say is because the births haven't happened yet, so we're really good at projecting the kindergartners for births that have happened already. But for babies who have not been thought about yet, it is difficult for us to say what will actually happen. So the birth data, we're trending and we're saying, okay, it has decreased. We expect it to come back up and decrease again. But for our kindergarten enrollment, and because we make such big decisions on these out-year projections, we can't say that it's going to decrease. The city, and as Jill spoke to with land use, the city has a lot of aggressive affordable housing development planning in the works. That tends to bring a lot of students for ACPS, and it tends to particularly bring a lot of young students to ACPS. And so for us, we use that 5-year, but in this case, and given the amount of kind of turmoil in our enrollment and in just and some of the transiency we've seen in Alexandria City, we did not feel comfortable continuing to show that decline in kindergarten and knowing that we would have to plan for it over time. And so that's what you're seeing here. That's why it's not, the lines are not directly related in this graph, except that one considers the other.
So there could be a decline in kindergarten enrollment.
There could be a
over time.
decline in kindergarten enrollment.
Would any of that be tied to the fact that, I mean, the city's building a lot of housing, as Jill referenced in her presentation, but the housing units being built today, approved by Planning Commission City Council, tend to mostly be efficiencies, 1-bedrooms, maybe some 2-bedrooms, but they're not, and they're small. They're smaller in terms of square footage than a similar unit built 25 years ago. They're not conducive to people raising a family.
Right.
Does that affect at all your projections to think about the fact that the people who might be moving into new housing, even if they decide to have a child, they're not going to stay here 5 years, they're going to move to, I mean, Loudoun County, Prince William, where they have a bigger place, different school system. I mean, how do you factor in to your calculations the zoning that the city's sort of deciding now is going to be governing new development in the city?
So we work very closely with them, and one of the things that we do outside of the enrollment projection process is we do what we call student generation rates. And so whenever a new development, and particularly a multifamily unit development, comes to the city council for approval, and prior to when it comes to the city council for approval, planning and zoning and us will work together to estimate how many students could be generated by that building. And so that might look totally different. You're absolutely right. With a lot of these particularly high-rise luxury apartment buildings that may be studios, 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom, not many, almost none, in some cases 0 students live in those buildings for ACPS. Now when you add an element of affordability, that changes a little bit, even if they are 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom, because our families have high needs and are making it work in different living situations. But you are correct that bedroom count, affordability play a large role in whether or not students will live in certain housing types.
And how do you sort of calculate what the children of people in new housing, where they're going to go. I mean, for example, where I live in Delray and the area around Delray, if a house is torn down and rebuilt, the house is worth more than $1 million. It's a high income level property. Is it true that in that case, a family moving in there will be more likely or more able to send their children to a private school than the ACPS? Whereas when we're talking about these sort of high density rental developments that we and I just discussed, they're also fairly expensive. I mean, how hard is it for you to sort of keep track of where that trend is moving? I guess my bottom line question is it possible that over time the entire population of the school system will decline because of people becoming more of an urban city as opposed to a suburban, or what it's been for the past 20 years, a mix of urban and suburban?
I would say yes, it's possible. And based on the numbers that we've seen right now with birth data declining, with some of the enrollment that we lost in the pandemic, if you just took a snapshot of ACPS right now, you might say, yeah, it's gonna go down in the next few years. But given some of the immigrant populations that we've had move into the region, as well as the housing goals that the city has with some new developments that they're building that are could be large developments that bring a couple hundred students. That's a big swing for us in one direction. So there is an affordability component. Certainly our families have other options, especially in some of the single-family homes that are very high priced. And we saw a lot of families take that opportunity during the pandemic when we were closed.
Well, here's a question about that.
Okay.
What percentage of Alexandria's school-age children attend private schools today? Do you have an idea about that?
We get this question all the time, and I hear people make up numbers, and so I'm so happy it is here. So all we can do is estimate based on what the census comes in with and what data we have. We've done an estimate of that, and the range I would say was somewhere between like 78 and 88%, like somewhere in that range of school-age population goes to ACPS schools. That is constantly changing, and it's really hard for us to track because we only have ACPS student data, so I don't know every kid between the ages of 5 and 18 in the city of Alexandria. So that's about what we track, and if you hear someone list an exact number, please send them my information because I'd love to know how they got.
Well, I mean, the city of Alexandria doesn't have that many private schools. It's got Bishop Ireton, it's got Episcopal, it's got
Correct.
It's got St. Stephen, St. Agnes. I mean, you can kind of quantify how many slots there are in those schools. The question is how many of the students in those schools actually live in the city and not in Fairfax or Arlington.
Right, and how many students that live in the city of Alexandria travel to Fairfax or Arlington to go to a private school? Right. Yes, so
okay.
It's a little difficult to track.
Another one for you is, I'm sorry, it's a kind question. So many of our schools are well over capacity. I'm not sure that's true or not. Will construction, and of course right now there's a new middle school being built, or a new high school being built, will ever catch up, particularly at the high school and middle school levels? Can you give people sort of a facilities update on what's going on with our high school reconstruction?
Sure. So a lot of our schools are overcrowded. We recently, in 2018, we opened a new Patrick Henry School and we opened a Ferdinand T. Day Elementary School. Both those schools added capacity at the elementary level, so we're catching up there. But we do now those big cohorts are coming up to middle and the high school, and there are issues that we have to address. Currently, we have 2 projects that are under construction. Our new Douglas MacArthur Elementary School is set to open this fall, this August. It'll open, and it's larger than the school was previously, so that's additional capacity there, elementary again. And then we are rebuilding the Mini Howard, and if you drive on West Braddock Road and you see steel very high in the air, that is it. It is a new 1,600 student high school. It's almost doubles the size of it's more than double the size of the old Mini Howard building, intended to house grades 9 through 12. That's supposed to open in not this coming year, but the following academic year. So that's what we're doing on the elementary.
And how will that affect the existing Alexandria City High School?
So currently Mini Howard is part of the existing Alexandria City High School. It currently houses our 9th grade. And so this new campus will add about approximately 800 seats, 750 to 800 seats at the high school level. So it will reduce the amount of kids at the King Street campus and close out the old Minnie Howard building.
Okay, thank you. Jill, there's a question for you. I hope you're enjoying this. I'm learning a lot already. This is a subjective question because it may not be true. Why do you think growth is good? Adding 40,000 people to Alexandria will mean more traffic jams and more pollution, arguably. And part two, it seems everybody who wants a job has one. Businesses do not need to grow. There's an argumentative aspect to both those questions, but you must address those kind of questions all the time in your job. So is growth always good? I mean, is it ever in the interest of a jurisdiction to say, time out, we're kind of done? I mean, Alexandria has, I want to say, arguably 7 or 8 square miles of land, and it's growing at a rate where it's going to be soon, in 20 years, what Arlington's population is today. I mean, is there I know there's a school of thought that says if you don't grow, a jurisdiction ossifies and dies. I mean, it doesn't become vibrant, it doesn't renew itself. But is there ever a point at which growth becomes more costly than not growing?
Certainly, there's certainly good and bad, for sure, to growth in many respects. The growth is not so good when it comes to the overcapacity for schools, the transportation issues, but growth is good when you want to compete as a region nationally as well as internationally, and you want to stay strong as a region. So if you stop having that vibrancy in your region and you stay stagnant or you start to decline, the businesses will choose elsewhere, and then the businesses that are here will start to follow those businesses that go elsewhere, and you can certainly have the decline from the vibrancy that a community like ours thrives on. So it goes both ways. So it's really a balance issue of that the citizens as well as the policymakers need to decide on us. Where is that balance? And so that's not something I can speak to, but certainly that's at the forefront of the whole issue, is where is that balance?
Okay. Here's a more general question on the census that I don't think we touched on in your presentation. The question is, are Latinos residents underrepresented by the recent census data? And I'd like to add on to that. There's been a change demographically in the city in the past 30 years in terms of its major two minority groups, African Americans and Latinos. I think there's been a shift where we've lost the African American population, we've gained some Latino population. Is that true? I mean, what can you sort of tell us about the picture for the minority populations in Alexandria?
Yeah, I can't necessarily speak to Alexandria, but it's on our website. If you go to the Northern Virginia Regional Dashboard, I don't have it memorized as to what Alexandria's race demographic is and how it has grown over time, but it is on our dashboard. What I do know is that Northern Virginia's Hispanic and Latino population has certainly been climbing over the years, but what you may have heard was how some of these demographic groups may have either not been growing as fast based on the latest 2020 census, because there's the two or more multiracial category that the Census Bureau really changed this time around when it asked the questions for the 2020 census. And so it's not really an apples to apples comparison of your race today versus in the past because of the way the Census Bureau changed its question. And Census Bureau really changed it so they could clarify and make it clearer to the foreign-born folks who had trouble understanding what the Census Bureau was asking for previously. They really clarified it to make it for Hispanics to realize that That is not a race. Instead, they have to choose if they are white, if they are of two or more races. And so clarifying all the clarifications and changes to the question that the Census Bureau did really led the two or more multiracial population to really increase dramatically from 2010. But that again is due to the change in the question. So any slowing of growth or declining growth of Hispanics is likely due to them being recategorized into the two or more category.
So according to the questioner here, it's not necessarily true that they're underrepresented, just that they're differently categorized because of how they answer the questions.
Yes, because it's all personal. It's all how you perceive yourself and what race you perceive yourself as. So the way that they're perceiving themselves today may have been different than how they perceived themselves previously.
Okay. Erica, these are questions for you. I hope they're pretty easy. What percentage of kids who go to Alexandria kindergarten stay until middle school? And the second one is, and what percentage of middle school students stay through high school? In other words, is there at some point in their education a break where they decide, we've tried this for a while, I want to go somewhere else?
So I can say, and I can't give you an exact percentage. I apologize for the person who asked this. You can email us, and we'll try and get that for you. But because we track year over year, so kindergarten to first grade might be a certain percentage, and then going all the way up to 12th grade. Generally speaking, we lose students year over year. So kindergarten is our largest cohort. They come in as kindergartners, they lose a little at first, lose a little at second, third, fourth, fifth. We tend to lose more at third grade and sixth grade than at other grade levels. Varying reasons for that. A lot of times at third grade, families might be growing out of their homes or deciding to move somewhere where they can have more space, like in Fairfax County or Loudoun County. At sixth grade, middle school is very scary, and parents and families may look for alternate options at the middle school level. And then we gain a lot back at ninth grade. Ninth grade is actually our only cohort survival rate from 8th to 9th grade that is positive. Or that is, it's not a negative, it doesn't decline, it grows. We grow from 8th to 9th grade.
Why is that?
Alexandria City High School just has a history and a reputation. I think some students, it's been historically the case that a lot of students will go to a private school for middle school and come to Alexandria City High School. Additionally, we have a lot of immigrant students who come in at the 9th grade age and are placed into the high school at that level. And it also has to depend, and I'm not on the teaching, learning, and leadership side, but it also has to, and I see Mr. Eaton, so maybe he can clarify for me, but it also depends on what English level they cover. Your grade at the high school level depends on what English level you have passed. So our 9th grade cohort is large, but not as large as the kindergarten, if that makes sense.
So in both your jobs, you deal with census data, which is, the facts are the facts. There's no alternative census data. It is what it is. You see the same numbers, and you work together with people in the city, you work with people in the 13 jurisdictions, right? You're all seeing the same numbers, but do jurisdictions use that data once they have it in different ways? In other words, does the objectivity that your jobs bring to presenting this information when you write your reports sometimes get cherry-picked, for lack of a better term, for reasons of argument? And if so, how do you feel about that?
Let me go first if you want. Okay, so let me think about that. So the census data, and as I mentioned, ACPS really uses its own enrollment data and birth data from the Virginia Department of Health.
And does the city accept your data as being the data, or do they have their own?
Our enrollment data,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
That's our data. They would give us population projection data. We work collaboratively on the projection process, really because the city council approves our budgets and it's based on the projection, so the city has to have some kind of review level over that to say, yeah, that's right. We can't just project we're going to have 20,000 kids next year and ask for way more money than we need. So we don't do that, contrary to what people might say. When we look at census data, though, to answer questions like you mentioned before, what percentage of the school-age population does ACPS have versus maybe private schools have? That's where that information might be helpful. It's also helpful, we get birth data, and then we have, pre-K and kindergarten enrollment, and that in between, that 0 to 4, we really don't have any data on those kids. So identifying what gaps in service we might have at pre-K is helpful for us. And then in speaking to, how data might be used for certain purposes or others, I think the city or not even the city, but other entities may point to the census and say, how could you have that many enrollment and that much enrollment? This is the population, the school-age population. And we know that there are gaps and margins of error in the census as well, and so we really feel our data is best because it's actual, it's students and seats that we're able to base our information on, and then work with the city on their population projections, which sometimes include census data.
Well, from what you said earlier when you first introduced yourself, your projections have been pretty much on point the past several years.
Yes, well, so COVID years.
Yeah.
The first year of COVID, we couldn't have predicted that impact, but outside of that, yes, we aim to be within 1%.
So if you had time to think of an answer to the question, Jill, about...
Sure, I can respond. I would just say that all the jurisdictions in our region, not only in Virginia, but also DC and Maryland jurisdictions, they all produce the forecasts that you saw me present, and they do so with similar intentions in mind. They all do it for purposes of the fiscal planning, knowing how much of a budget they're going to need for future planning, for future capital facilities such as your schools, your fire departments, and your libraries, all those things. So they certainly use it the same way for all those jurisdictions, and they use the census data and the forecast also for planning not only the services, but also for things like your environmental assessments, like air quality and traffic assessments, and the needs of the roads, the needs for alternative transportation. So all this census data and demographics that we have shared tonight certainly get used in numerous ways for planning our region, for sure. And I guess when it's used in different ways, I guess a lot of jurisdictions will also use it for economic development, but also for the very reason that we brought up earlier, is to determine where they need to balance their land use plans and the zoning. If they need to change the zoning for a purpose to slow down growth, or if there's a segment of the population they need to serve better, such as small units for affordability reasons, they'll make their decisions based on using this data as well. So there's many uses.
When we talked in preparation for the panel tonight, you mentioned that the Council of Governments, which you work closely with, is doing an update report that'll be released later this year on the sort of the major changes in the region that are occurring, right?
Yes, they are in the process of updating their numbers as we speak, and let's see, sometime, I believe it's this year or early next year, that they will be adopting their new numbers. And the Council of Governments updates their numbers generally every 1 to 2 years to account for any changes in the land use plans of the region.
Do you see any surprises in that report that you can talk about now?
I don't know of anything that's really different than this past round that they just released in, I believe it was early 2002, they just released it.
2021, you mean?
2022.
Yeah, 2022, yeah.
Sorry, but
That's okay.
way back there. Yeah, it's not very different. So
I mean, the reason I asked the question, and maybe we'll do a separate panel on this later in the year if the report comes out, is because the Council of Governments itself was very active in sort of asking jurisdictions, not just in Virginia, but in Maryland and the district, to change change their land use and zoning plans to accommodate population growth anticipated by the arrival of Amazon and the various subcontractors that Amazon will engage.
Yes, you're absolutely correct on that, that Amazon was included in their previous round for Arlington, as well as the impact on, excuse me, on the rest of the region and where the people will live. That was certainly included, and these upcoming rounds that they're doing will account for Amazon further, but they have been pushing the jurisdictions to increase their housing capacity to account for the new Amazon and all these other new technical entities that are coming to our region. So if we do want to be able to fill those jobs and make ourselves the next tech region other than Silicon Valley, certainly one of the ways that we will have to change things is increase our housing, which MWCOG is really pushing that message. You will hear that from them.
Okay. For people who've been listening here in person and online, we're going to put these slides on our website so you can look at them at your leisure and think about them, as well as the links to the report that you both mentioned.
Yes,
we'll do that as well.
In my presentation, several links to the reports are all throughout my
Okay,
presentation.
we'll do that. We've exhausted all the questions from the audience, which is a little unusual to have so few, although they're good questions. But we're at the end of our program. And before I thank you both, I want to inform people about next month's program, which is going to be really, really good. It is on the climate for small business in Alexandria. As if any of you know small business owners or are a small business owner or patronize small businesses, you know that they're being squeezed, particularly because something called the Amazon effect, where you have landlords raising rents to the point where a lot of longtime Alexandria businesses, I think of the Silver Parrot on King Street down in Old Town, there for 25 years, their rent was doubled and they had to leave. And that's happening in Del Rey, it's happening in other neighborhoods. So we're gonna have a really good panel of business owners, realtors, and Bill Regan, the former city's small business development coordinator, on our panel in February. It'll be moderated by Elizabeth Seltzer, who's here, and I anticipate it'll be very controversial because small businesses are struggling right now to survive, not just after the pandemic, but because of the Amazon effect and other things like the inability to hire workers because of the labor shortage we learned about tonight. So, Erica, thank you very much for being here. Jill, I learned a great deal. I hope all of you did as well. Please give our panelists a hand. And I'm going to put in one more plug for Agenda Alexandria. If you're here and you're not a member, please consider becoming a member. It's not expensive, but it sure helps us keep these venues going. Or if you have a neighbor or a friend or someone you go to church with, tell them about our organization, and maybe they'll take a look next month and think of becoming a member too. But thank you all for being here very much. I'm Rod Cookrow, Erica, and Jill. Thank you very much for being here on our panel tonight. And that's it for January. Bye, everybody.
This is Agenda Alexandria, a nonpartisan organization that takes a look at the issues without taking sides. Whether it's the city's sewer system, education, public safety, climate change, or perhaps a look back into Alexandria's history, Agenda Alexandria is here to shine a light. What makes the organization so successful is our people, the people who run it, our panelists, our moderators, and of course, our members. Agenda Alexandria is a member-funded organization, and we invite you to become one today by visiting agendaalexandria.org.